I pulled into the driveway with the takeout bag in hand, the smell of fried chicken and mashed potatoes hitting me as I grabbed it out of the truck. It was Friday night, supposed to be our night. I expected to walk in, see Stacy at the table or the couch, maybe even hear a greeting. But nothing. Just the soft glow of the living room lights and the faint tapping of her phone screen. "Hey, Stace," I called, closing the door behind me. "Got dinner?" No response. I walked over, set the bag down on the counter, and saw her sitting there, scrolling, eyes locked on her phone. "Stacy," I said again, a little sharper this time. She barely glanced up. "I already ate," she muttered, tapping the screen some more. Book club girls had something earlier. I stood there for a second, taking in the silence. Then I said, "You couldn't have texted me that? Let me know?" She rolled her eyes without even looking at me. "Oh, come on, Mike. You're being dramatic. It's no big deal." I felt the heat start to rise in my chest. No big deal? We haven't had dinner together in weeks. Haven't had a real conversation in months. She didn't flinch. "We talk all the time." I shook my head, tried to stay calm. "Yeah, we talk about stuff. But not us. Not where this is going." She put the phone down finally, but her face was unreadable. "What do you want me to say? You're always so serious about everything." "I'm fine." "Are you?" I asked, holding her gaze. "Are you really fine? Because it feels like we're living two separate lives." "Mike, don't. You're making this into something it's not." "Am I?" Depressed. "Because I've been asking myself lately if you even want to be married anymore." She took a breath, her eyes narrowing. "If you're that unhappy, just leave." I stood there for a moment, the words settling between us. Slowly, I put the keys down on the counter, looked at the takeout bag one last time, and walked out the door. The truck was already packed. The food stayed behind. I didn't bother checking my phone until I was parked in front of the motel. No point in dealing with it while I was driving. The neon sign buzzed in the distance, flickering red, and the parking lot was quiet, like a lot of places after dark. I grabbed the bag from the truck, my hands still half numb from the cold, and walked into the lobby. The clerk didn't look up, just handed me a keycard without asking anything. I barely noticed the smell of mildew as I headed for the stairs, the fluorescent lights flickering above me. I didn't even care anymore. The room was basic, cheap, but it didn't matter. It was just a place to sleep for the night, maybe two. My thoughts were already elsewhere. I pulled my phone out as soon as I walked inside, setting the bag of food on the table. One message to my employee: "New install on Monday. Get it ready." Hit send. Then to a buddy: "Can you help me move some stuff? Need it done by Sunday." I sat down on the edge of the bed, my thumb hovering over the screen. I hadn't even realized how much of the last few months I'd been preparing for this. It wasn't dramatic. No big blow-up. Just slow, steady decisions that had been stacking up, one on top of the other, until there was no denying it anymore. I pulled open the drawer of the nightstand and found a pen. The notepad in there was empty, so I started writing. The words hit me, heavy and final. I funded her piece while mine bled out. That felt like the cleanest truth I could write. No emotion, no anger, just a statement. A fact. She'd never seen it, never asked, but I'd been drowning for a long time. And I'd let it happen. I glanced around the room, taking in the cheapness of it all. This place was a step down from where I'd been living, but in a way it felt more real. The house back home, with its shiny countertops and perfect arrangement of furniture, had stopped being a home a while ago. It felt more like a showroom, something to impress people, not to live in. I opened my phone again and went through the basics. Change emergency contact info to a cousin in case anything went wrong. Updated my insurance, bought a jacket for winter. Little things. Quiet decisions. I didn't want to feel like I was making a move, but I knew I was. Slowly and quietly, I was cutting ties with the life I'd built. The worst part was, I hadn't even been angry. Not really. I was tired. That's all it was. Tired of trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I lay back on the bed, the weight of everything finally starting to settle in. There was no big conversation left to have. No more fighting, no more pretending it was going to turn around. What had been said was said. It was done. There was a low hum in the background, the fridge vibrating in the corner, but it barely registered. Everything was just noise now. I wasn't even sad, just tired of trying. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness of the room sink into me. The phone buzzed on the bedside table, the name on the screen catching me off guard. It was Stacy's dad. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and I wasn't sure what I was expecting. "Mike, hey," he said, sounding like he was already halfway through something. "We've got an issue with the surveillance system at the gate. It's glitching again. Can you come by and take a look?" I stared at the screen for a second, then answered, trying to keep it neutral. "I'm not your system guy anymore, Rick." There was a pause on the other end. "Come on, Mike. Don't make it dramatic. It's just a quick fix. The system's always been on you." I felt my jaw tighten. I hadn't talked to Rick in weeks, but it was clear as hell he thought everything was still the same. He didn't want to know what had changed. He wasn't acknowledging any of it. No mention of the fact that I was staying in a cheap motel, that Stacy and I hadn't shared a word in days. "I'm serious," I said. "I'm done with the HOA system. I've moved on. Find someone else." Rick didn't like that. "Mike, don't be like that. Just handle it. We don't need this drama." I hung up before he could say anything else. The weight in my chest felt heavier than it had in days. But the decision was already made. I reached for the laptop, opened it, and went straight to the file folder. The agreement was buried under a few layers of paperwork, but I found it quickly. A master service agreement. It was old, dated back to when I first set up the infrastructure for the neighborhood gate cameras, the sensors, everything. It was all mine to manage at the start, my company funding and maintaining the entire system. It had always been a good contract. Solid. No red flags. I scrolled through the document, my eyes scanning the clauses until I found what I needed. There it was. Full transfer rights at owner discretion. I sat back, the weight of it settling in. Rick and the HOA were screwed. I had legally set it up so that if I ever decided to step away, everything would be transferred over to the next person, and they would have to pick up the tab. I'd been quietly building this exit for years. Each move, each detail was deliberate. No one had noticed. I could feel the quiet resignation creeping in, but no real anger. Just a clean, final end to something that had been on life support for far too long. I opened my email, attached a copy of the agreement, and sent it to both Stacy's and Rick's emails. They would get it eventually. A few more formalities, some questions they wouldn't have answers to, but it would be a clean break. I leaned back in the chair, looking at the screen for a while. It wasn't about being angry or getting revenge. It was just business now. Just a clean exit. I closed the laptop and went to bed. I dialed my commercial service partner's number without thinking twice. It was late in the day, but they'd always been good about handling things after hours, especially if it meant keeping the client happy. "Mike," Jim answered, his voice low and tired. "What's up? Got a project for you. Remember the HOA gate system? The one I set up a while ago?" "Yeah, I know the one. You still managing that?" "Not anymore. I'm transferring it over to you." He was quiet for a beat. "You sure about that?" "Yeah. I've got all the specs for the system," I said, pulling up the documents I'd kept on file. "Gates, sensors, backups. It's all there. I've worked it out, Jim. It's a clean transfer. No field work, just a back-end swap. You can handle it remotely." He let out a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to do it. You want us to bill them as a commercial client, then?" "Exactly. Same terms, same setup. But now they're gonna pay for it. You can send the invoice directly. You've got everything you need to take over." I could hear the clicking of keys in the background as Jim went through the specs, double-checking the details. It wasn't a complicated system, just a bunch of cameras and motion sensors with a basic alert system, but it had been a pain in the ass to maintain, especially when people didn't appreciate how much went into it. "When do you want to make it official?" Jim asked, his tone shifting from business as usual to something a little more interested. "Right now," I said, pulling up the paperwork I'd already prepped. I've got the transfer documents ready. Just need to sign off on them. A few minutes later, I'd signed the digital papers and included both Stacy's and Rick's emails. Officially, the neighborhood was now a commercial client with all the extra fees and terms that came with it. I sent it off without hesitation. No more mess. No more pretending. I didn't feel any satisfaction, just the weight of it. All the years I'd spent keeping it running, maintaining it for them, and now it was out of my hands. I wasn't angry, wasn't upset. It just felt like the right thing to do. Done, I said to Jim, staring at the screen for a moment. Get it on the books. They'll be your problem now. I'll take care of it, Jim replied. Let me know if you need anything else. I hung up, and the silence that followed settled in like a thick fog. It was over in every sense. I wasn't tied to the neighborhood anymore. I opened up the county website and filed the paperwork with the necessary forms to make it all official. There was nothing left to do but wait for the confirmation emails to come through. I leaned back in the chair and rubbed my eyes, finally feeling the tiredness creeping in. It had been a long road to get here, but this was the end of it. I'm not angry, I muttered to myself, the words sounding flat in the stillness. I'm just finished. A week later, the automated emails started flooding in. I was sitting at the small desk in the motel room when the first one hit. Service activation confirmed. Followed by another. Billing details attached. Then another. Demand surcharge for peak usage period. I couldn't help but watch the inbox fill up. Each email was a step further away from everything I'd done to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. Each one a reminder of just how much I'd been holding up on my own for so long. Stacy and her dad were getting them too. I knew that because their names popped up in the CC field. The HOA board had to be seeing them, too. There was no way Rick didn't forward them. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel something that wasn't just tired resignation. I felt a hint of satisfaction, because they were about to realize exactly how much I'd been covering for them all these years. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and panic texts. I saw the missed calls from Rick and Stacy, saw the messages piling up. Mike, you need to look at this. Call me. This is urgent. What the hell's going on? I didn't respond to any of them. It wasn't my problem anymore. They wanted the lights without the wireman, and now they had both on paper. The system that had always run smoothly when I managed it was suddenly governed by contracts, by policy, by costs they didn't know how to deal with. Things like license renewals and maintenance contracts, stuff I'd handled quietly in the background for years, were now staring them in the face. I'd been careful. Everything was spelled out in the transfer, every detail locked in. But they hadn't paid attention. They thought it was easy. They thought the lights just stayed on because they had some magic machine running everything. They hadn't understood that there was a man behind it, keeping the gears turning. Rick's desperation started showing in the emails, too. Mike, this is getting out of hand. You need to fix this. The HOA can't afford this. Then, you know the system better than anyone. Come back and help us out here. It was almost pathetic, but I still didn't answer. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish them, because they hadn't taken a second to even acknowledge how much I'd done. They just expected it all to keep running on autopilot. Now they were seeing the cost of that. The HOA board members were starting to panic. I knew that too because I heard about it through the grapevine. A few of them had reached out to my old employee trying to get answers. But even they were running into the same walls. They needed me, but I wasn't coming. They couldn't get it back in their hands, not unless they paid the price. They weren't going to pull me back into the fold with some quick fix. A part of me knew I should feel something more than this quiet satisfaction. I should feel bad, maybe, but I didn't. I'd done my part for long enough, and now they had to figure it out on their own. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. A few days after the flood of emails, the first real sign of trouble came through. 72 hours until access control is disabled due to payment noncompliance. I'd expected it, but seeing it in print still hit me a little harder than I thought it would. I glanced at the camera feed. The rear gate was the first to go. The signal dropped just like that. I clicked over to the pool cameras. Same thing, cut out, no signal. A couple of the other gates were still functional, but I knew it was just a matter of time before the whole system started going dark. I wasn't surprised. The HOA fund had been stretched thin lately. They'd poured money into landscaping upgrades and a party planning budget for some event I hadn't even been told about. They'd prioritized everything else, except the one thing that kept the neighborhood safe. I'd always known this day was coming. They just didn't have the cash anymore, and they didn't have the discipline to manage the system properly. Stacy texted me a few hours later. "Mike, the system's down. What's going on?" I didn't respond. Rick called next. I didn't pick up. I didn't even glance at my phone. It wasn't worth the effort. The next email came through just as I expected. System suspended pending payment. All access control and surveillance services will be disabled. The subject line hit like a hammer. It was finally happening. The gates froze. I could see it all from my screen. Residents who'd relied on that system for so long were now locked out, forced to deal with the consequences of the decisions they'd made. No more quick fixes. No more shortcuts. I sat there, still in the motel room, staring at the screen. I was logged into the system until the full handoff was completed, and I had full admin rights, something I hadn't let go of yet. I didn't need to. I wasn't in charge of the system anymore, but I still held the keys, at least for a little while longer. The contractors, the ones who'd been scheduled to do the routine checks, were already walking off the job. I'd known they would. They weren't getting paid either. They weren't going to stick around for a promise that wasn't going to be kept. Couldn't blame them. I'd seen enough to know that the wheels of this thing were about to come off, and there was nothing anyone could do about it now. They'd all made their bed. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle in, but without regret. A machine only waits so long before it shuts down. And that's what this was. A system that had been running on borrowed time, held together by the work I'd put in for years. Now it was all coming apart. I let out a breath, feeling a kind of finality I hadn't fully understood until that moment. The first message came through a few hours after everything went dark. It was from Stacy, a voice note. I clicked on it even though I knew exactly what it would be. Her tone was soft, like she was trying to keep the whole thing light. "Mike," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we just reset the system together? I don't know what's happening, but we can fix it, right? Just help me out." I turned the volume down, stopped the message halfway through, and sat back. She didn't get it. She didn't understand that this wasn't something to fix. Not this time. It wasn't a flick of the switch or a push of a button. It was over. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, another notification pinged through. A photo from Stacy. The clubhouse. The parking lot. It was overflowing with trash. I stared at the image, that pile of garbage in the frame. It was as if she was trying to make me feel something, to draw me back in with some little crisis. I had no interest in that anymore. I typed back, simple and to the point. "Contact your service provider." Hit send. Then I turned the phone face down on the table, the same way I turned my life face down a week ago. By the time the night rolled in, the fallout had already started. Word spread fast. A few HOA board members resigned. I saw their names pop up in emails, some of them saying they had no choice but to step down, others citing unforeseen circumstances. Everyone was scrambling, pointing fingers at anyone they could. I didn't care. My former employee called around midnight, his voice tight, nervous. "Hey Mike, some of the residents are blaming me. They think I'm the one who screwed it all up. You think you can talk to them?" I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. "No," I said, no hesitation. "You tell them it's not on you. Blame helps people avoid mirrors." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "Yeah, you're right." "I know," I replied. "Just let them blame whoever they want. Doesn't change anything." I ended the call without waiting for a response. A text popped up soon after from one of the neighbors. Tim, the guy down the block who always waved but never actually talked much. His message was brief, but there was an edge of something real in it. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't get it before. They thought you were the switch, not the circuit." I didn't know how to respond to that. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel the need to explain anything. But somehow, it felt like the first real acknowledgement I'd gotten through all of this. Someone, even just one person, saw it. I thumbed a quick reply. It's too late now. I put the phone down again. The world was still spinning. But the people who needed me weren't even looking in the right direction. They didn't want the circuit. They wanted the switch. And when the switch got flipped, they realized they were never in control. I went to bed that night feeling nothing but the quiet hum of everything that had already been decided. The knock came at the door early that evening. I didn't even need to check who it was. I stood up and opened it, and there she was, Stacy, looking almost the same as when I'd left, like nothing had changed. But everything had. She stood there, her arms folded, eyes uncertain but still hopeful, like maybe she could change the script if she said the right thing. You don't even know how hard it's been, she said as soon as she stepped inside, like she was stepping over a threshold of some kind. But there was nothing left to cross. The place is falling apart, Mike. The system's down, the HOA's falling apart, everything's just falling apart. It didn't used to be like this. We used to have a life here. I didn't sit down. I just leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching her try to find her words. The silence between us felt like an old wound I couldn't quite close. We built something, Mike. She went on, her voice softer now. We made a life, remember? It didn't have to end like this. I didn't realize what I was doing to you. I waited, letting her talk, letting her throw her words at me like they were supposed to change something. But they didn't. You didn't want a partner, Stacy? I said, cutting through the noise. You wanted a technician on call. That's what I was, right? Fixing things when they broke, running the system so everything worked just like you wanted. But you never really wanted to see me. You just wanted me to fix things for you. For us. And that was fine until it wasn't. She flinched at that, but didn't back off. Her eyes flicked to the floor, like she was trying to find a way to make sense of it all. Mike, I miss you. I miss us. I took a breath, feeling the weight of what I had to say. You don't miss me. You miss the idea of me. The person who fixed everything, who kept it all running smoothly. But that's not who I am anymore. You don't get to rewrite the story just because it's getting hard. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something else. But the words didn't come. I could see the fight in her, the part of her that still wanted to make this right. But it wasn't the same anymore. Respect is the only currency I accept now, I said, the words steady but final. You didn't respect me when it mattered. Now we're here. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue. But she didn't. I didn't need her to. She knew it. I knew it. The silence between us didn't feel like a threat, though. It was just the end. Without a word, she turned and left, the door clicking shut behind her. I didn't watch her go, didn't say anything else. Just stood there in the quiet. That was the moment I finally felt something I hadn't before, respect. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And that silence felt like the loudest thing in the room. The next morning, I woke up early to handle the last of it. The loose ends, the things that were still lingering. I opened my laptop, logged into the HOA business registry, and removed myself from the list. It was clean, simple. One less thing to tie me to it. I clicked through the shared utility accounts next. Anything that linked me to the house was gone. The connections were severed. I forwarded the last of the mail that had been piling up, stuff I hadn't cared enough to deal with until now. It wasn't that I needed to get rid of it. I just wanted everything out of my life. Then, I grabbed the certified copy of the system transfer notice. The one that made it all official. The one that handed over everything I'd built for the HOA, for Stacy, for the neighborhood. I drove to the county clerk's office myself. I wasn't in any rush, just moving through the motions. It wasn't personal. I wasn't angry, just done. The clerk looked at the papers like she was trying to make sense of them, flipping through the documents slowly. She glanced up at me, eyes narrowed in curiosity. We don't see these often, she said. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. You will. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything more, just stamped it and handed it back to me. I drove back home with the paperwork in hand, but there was no satisfaction. Nothing really. I just needed to wrap it up. I didn't feel any rush to start over, but I didn't need to look back either. I stopped feeling guilty a while ago. I thought about how many times I'd put off what needed to be done, how many things I'd let slide just to avoid the fight. It wasn't guilt now. It was just a clean effort. I stopped at the hardware store on my way back. Bought a few tools for the small space I was starting to make my own. Things I'd always put off buying, always borrowed before. A drill. Some screwdrivers. Nothing extravagant. Just what I needed. Simple. Later that afternoon, I returned a ladder to a neighbor. The same one I'd borrowed a few months ago to fix a leak in the roof. I didn't say anything except a quick, "Thanks for letting me use it." No small talk. No explanations. It was just another thing that had to get done. As I walked back to my apartment, I spotted the breaker panel on the side of a house across the street. I could see the tripped breaker through the window. It was a quick fix, so I went over, knocked, and helped out. The guy looked surprised, but I didn't make a big deal of it. "Thanks," he said, scratching his head. I just nodded. No problem. Felt good. Like it wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what was in front of me. The future. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. Just clean effort. No more guilt. No more strings. Weeks passed without much noise. Things settled in a way I hadn't expected. There was relief, sure. Some quiet pride, too. But a small, stubborn bit of sadness lingered. I tried to ignore it, just keep moving forward. The apartment was mine now, fully mine. No more looking back. Then one day Stacy sent a text. Just a simple one. "Hope you're well." I stared at it for a few seconds, feeling the weight of those words. They didn't mean anything anymore. Not like they used to. I'd moved on, and I wasn't sure she even realized that. I didn't hesitate, just typed back, "I'm not a door, not a bridge, just a completed circuit." It was blunt, but it was the truth. I wasn't the one who kept things running anymore. I wasn't the one people turned to when the lights went out. I wasn't there to fix things for her or for anyone else. And I wasn't sorry for it. A few minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. "Hi, Mike. This is Charlie from the neighborhood." The voice on the other end said, "I'm calling because we're having some issues with the maintenance contract. Looks like it fell through after the system reclassification. Any chance you can help us out?" I paused for a second, then said, "I'm no longer responsible for that facility." There was a long silence, then a quick, almost awkward, "Okay, thanks." I hung up and didn't think about it again. It wasn't my problem. I didn't have to carry it anymore. I put my phone down, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door. The air was cooler than I expected, but it was good. The walk along the river path was quiet, just the sound of my footsteps and the faint hum of the city in the distance. My apartment keys were in my pocket, and my mind was clear for the first time in ages. I reached my building and looked up. The porch light was on, the way it should be. I programmed it myself, just like I did with everything else now. I used to be the whole fuse box, managing everything, keeping everything running. Now I just keep my own lights on. And for the first time, that felt like enough.